What's not to love about the Barry Harris chord movements? I was fortunate enough to learn them from Barry Harris, so I'm going to share some ideas with you today. And we're going to split this down into 3 levels. We're going to look at how would you get into them in the first place. We'll do a brief look at what they are, although I have other lessons on that I'll link below, so I won't go too deep into that. But we'll look at what are they, how can you use them, how can you learn them, how can you progress through different levels of using them, and we'll look at some application and further study as well. So it's going to be fun. Let's get into it. First off, I'm going to be using movements on D minor 7 to G7, a simple 2/5 chord progression. And when we have a D minor 7th, its movements come from the F major 6 diminished scale. Don't be intimidated by the name. All it means is that we take an F6 and we also take a G diminished. Okay, those two chords, if I put them together, there's the F6 and the G diminished together, we get this scale, which is just like the F major scale, but it's got this extra flat 6 in there, right? So if we separate those out, we get the F major scale with that extra flat 6. And we have a scale now that truly has 8 notes, because the major scale has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we're back to 1. But this has that extra note, giving us kind of a more symmetrical thing. So that can be useful in improv. But anyway, today's about chord movements. If we take the first chord that's in that scale by just playing alternate notes, play one, miss one, play one, miss one, the way I just did, play one, miss one, play one, miss one, play one, miss one, play one, we get an F6. And if we do that on the second degree, play, miss, play, miss, play, miss, play, we'll get a G diminished. But the great thing is, if we keep going through the scale, all we're going to get is another F6, another G diminished, inverted, another F6. This is the one people mess up, watch out. G diminished, F6, G diminished, and F6. You could learn that by taking your F6 inversions up and down, and then your G diminished inversions up and down, and then intertwining them, right? F6, G diminished, etc., F6, G diminished, and that's your scale of chords. If you're enjoying this lesson, would you please do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you know when there's new content. A positive comment is really helping us grow here on YouTube and do more of this for you as well. And if it's time to level up your playing, then come and see us on Jazz Skills. More about that at the end. For now, let's get back to the lesson. So that's the basics of how you get the scale in the first place and turn it into chords. Now let's look at level 1, making some movements. So if we're playing a 2/5 progression, D minor 7 to G7, we could take any kind of G7 that you know. I tend to move that root up a half step, so I've got this diminished in the right hand. That's one way to do it. If I end up playing any others, I'll try and explain them as we go, but I don't want to sidetrack the purpose of the lesson too much either. So level 1 in these movements is simple moves up or down the scale. They can be quite blocked. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll explain that G7. But let's look at that move again. So we've got D minor 7, which is F6, because if you invert F6, you get D minor 7th. And their movement scales are the same, so you might as well learn one thing rather than 2 things, and there are other applications as well. So it's better to just learn it all comes from F6, or many things come from F6. So I'm going to say 1, 2, move, move, okay? Now the thing is, you can see our shell in the left hand, root and 7th. I'm going to complement the diminished note, either going up, so notes don't fight, or the left hand can go down. That's quite nice because you get this. You can hear the movement in there, right? So we've got some contrary movement. And by the way, this, for people that know brother chords, I've got another video on that as well that I'll link. This is the diminished we had. And we can move any note down to get other chords in the same family. This is an E7 over G7. Don't worry too much about that if that's new to you at this stage, but that's what I'm doing. It's like the same diminished we had earlier for G7 with one note moved down, okay? In fact, I'll try and stick to that concept of E7 over G7. Even the E triad works well on a G7, so I'll try and stick to that concept so we don't get too many possibilities. Another thing I might do is break up the left hand. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So left, left, move, move. Fine, perfectly nice move. Now that's just a simple thing going up. Maybe I'll take a move coming down. Fine, so what did I have? An F6, same as D minor 7. Through the scale to the diminished we spoke about earlier. Look how the left hand is going in the other direction. Doesn't have to be, but I like doing that. Goes in the other direction and we get to some sort of G7 chord, the one I mentioned earlier. And again, we could break up the left hand. And that's really some simple stuff to get you started. We'll be looking at application later, but you know, one of the biggest mistakes that people make with this is they try and go from everything has to be an arrangement in a song. And I think that's wrong, to be honest. I spent probably a year when I met Barry Harris just learning movements, not even worrying about application. And they came in themselves because I started to get a vocabulary. So I'm not saying it has to take you a year before anything happens. It's not like 0 and then a year you're at 100. It doesn't work like that either. There are many steps along the way. But the point I'm making is, don't worry about song application all the time, although we will look at some later. So in level 2, I'm going to take the same movement scale, but rather than just going up or just coming down, I'm going to introduce some patterns to it. So for example, I might jump from a major 6 to the next major 6 inversion. Let's go to the diminished and the next diminished inversion. Same major 6 to major 6. And then we'll get to some sort of G7. Something like this. There's my root 7th. There's the diminished. That completes the diminished I was talking about earlier, where the root moves up a half step. I've just got another G at the top. Sometimes people think they can't put those two together. You can. In the left hand, to go with that, I'm going to take a major note. I'll keep this note at the bottom, but I'll take a major note here to complement the majors there. And if the right hand goes up, I'll jump to the major that goes down. Watch that left hand. Something like that. Right? So now if I put it all together. And of course that could go to a 1 as well. You don't have to hold the D at the bottom. You could have it like this. You could even have this as your first major note, because that's also there. On level 3, I'm going to start moving just some of the notes in the major chords or diminished chords, so that you'll end up with mixtures of major and diminished notes. That's where the beauty and the tensions really come in that get released. So for example, if this is F6, then we don't need to move everything up to G diminished or everything down to the diminished to the left. We could take just the top 2 notes and move those up to diminished notes. So G diminished here, so these are going to be my top 2 notes. So that C and D could move up the scale like that. Okay, now how could we turn that into a move? Let's see. That's quite nice. We could even have the left hand in octaves moving down. Notice what's happened here is that those 2 notes, as the right hand kind of moved up, so as that right hand moved up the scale, we ended up with an empty major 6 note here that I filled in. So I ended up with this. There's one of the chords I spoke about earlier, kind of. We've got, let's keep it simpler, the G7 shell plus the E7 chord. That would be fine. I can also do it like this. Sometimes I miss out the D. That's what I did. To C major if you're going 2-5-1. Just doing little things like that through a couple of keys. Amazing. Now let me take it all down a tone. Voicings might not be identical. I'm practicing as well. Something like that. You see, so this brings us on to application, because you can use these things in several ways. The first way would be if you get lucky and your tune already has some single steps in the melody. In other words, single scale steps. One note going up and back down, or one note going up and then up again and then up again. Then that's a perfect opportunity for movement. So if we take, let's take My One and Only Love. Now you can hear there are many moves, but we're going to focus on the ones that we've been looking at today, or opportunities for them. Here's a D minor 7 with perfect opportunity for F major 6 diminished movements through the scale. So it could be something like this. Even that is similar to what we did earlier, isn't it? You can hear there are all these other movements as well, which we're not looking at today, but here's another D minor 7 with single steps. Perfect. You can also use these if you have a bit of space. So for example, if we put a 2-5 at the end of the first A section and want to play some D minor 7 movements using that F6 diminished scale, or major 6 diminished scale, means the same thing, then something like this. Let's say we just had a 1 chord and then 2-5. So that was one of our movements where the top 2 notes moved. That kind of thing. And of course, we're just scratching the surface here. There's so much more. For example, drop 2. So if I have something like that, I might take the second note from the top and put it down in the left hand. You get all sorts of nice stuff with those as well. But anyway, that's how you get started. To summarize, if you have some single steps in your melody, these are great. If you don't and you have some space, they can be useful. You could use them in introductions, when you're accompanying, to fill time, all that kind of thing. I hope you enjoyed that. And if it's time to level up your playing, whether you're at this stage or at the stage where you just need to get fluent in the language, then we have a developing fluency course for you on Jazz Skills. We have many lessons on this kind of thing, movements and voicings as well, tune application, patterns to practice, and everything you'll need. Help from me and a vibrant community as well. Hope to see you there. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.